Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Hey Sunshine. I am so excited today. I'm joined by Talida, and we are diving into all things women's health, hormones, fertility, seed cycling, and it is going to be an amazing chat. So, Talida is a fertility awareness educator with postgraduate education in biomedical science, majoring in reproductive, endocrinology, and nutrition science. She's also the founder of Hazel and Cacao, a plant-based women's health blog focusing on foods that support our health and our hormones. And she is super passionate about ongoing scientific research into women's hormones health, including the link between hormones, mental health, the menstrual cycle, our diet, fertility, and pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. Oh my God, this is so exciting. Talida, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it is so good to have you here. And I kind of want to provide a little bit of like context about why I was just wanting to get you on the show and just chat about all of these things. So if you don't mind, I'm going to share a little bit about my story with my hormones over the past couple of months, just to provide a bit of a framework about the conversation we're going to have today. So for anyone who's listening, the past probably about 6 months, I've really noticed some different things going on with my hormones. And I really noticed that I was having cystic acne. I was probably about 2 weeks of my cycle having like the sorest boobs. Like I'm talking to Lita, like when I was like getting up in the morning, I was like, I can't even touch them. They're so sore.
Yeah, I've been there. I know.
You've been there. I know. And so many women, like they have these signs and these symptoms, but they just put up with them. So like all of these things were going on. I was super stressed. I'm trying to think what else, like painful periods, just it was like all of the hormone symptoms I was having. And just as we were chatting about before the show, I just had this download of like, you've got to try out seed cycling. And so we'll get into exactly what that is, but just using foods, like simple foods such as seeds, to completely change how my hormones were working. And like now I'm like no longer painful periods, my acne's gone, my boobs are like not, changing and like growing into watermelons every month. And even like my weight fluctuation, like I used to fluctuate so much. I would go from skinny 2 weeks to like bloated and just like feeling really pudgy 2 weeks. So that's kind of the framework and like the background about why I'm just so interested and excited about this chat today, Talida.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I've definitely been there.
Yeah.
I've felt all those things. And yeah, I'm interested, like excited to get into the reasons as to why seed cycling would have helped you so much, because it's pretty cool. Yeah.
Oh, and it's just like mind blowing. Something so simple can have such a profound effect. So
yeah.
Yeah, well, I first want to start off with like your journey and like what led you to do what you're doing today, and sort of being so in depth into women's health and reproduction and fertility.
Yeah, so my story, like most people, I would say, is sort of rooted in a health trauma that I had. So it all was around the hormonal contraception that I chose when I got married. So this was 14 years ago now, and I chose the Implanon contraception, which is the rod that they put in your arm, the implant, and I did really badly on it. Kept going back to the doctors. They said, you'll get used to it. I never did. I spotted the whole time. And after about 8 months, I decided to take it out. Felt instantly better, but then my cycles didn't return. And that came, well, that's not true. The first month they did come back, and then after that they didn't. And any bleeding that I did have was not a period.
Yeah.
And with that came a very severe panic and anxiety disorder, which I'd never experienced before. And it was so severe that it led to seizures. So that's what I always sort of say that to people, that my anxiety was so bad that it led to seizures. I haven't quite met too many people that can say that. It was absolutely horrendously bad. It was extremely traumatic. I was put on antidepressants to help with the seizures, and it did take the edge off. It made the seizures a lot more manageable, but they didn't help my anxiety. And I just kind of felt drugged when I was on them. And when it was time for me to come off them, it made me worse, because I went through a very bad withdrawal reaction from it. So and that withdrawal reaction made me nauseous with lower appetite and food aversion, amongst many other things, for a very long time. So I really, really struggled to eat. I was already underweight. I became even more underweight, and it was kind of getting scary, because it was just like, if you don't have the ability to eat, like, how long can you survive, really? So yeah, I think I just got to a point where I hit rock bottom. And I said, you know, I can't, the pharmaceuticals have failed me. I have to do something else. And so, yeah, that's what I started my journey, very long journey. Yeah, that's the story behind it.
So what was some of like the first steps you were taking in this journey? Because obviously you were like, okay, like I've gone to the doctors, I've been put in the too hard, quote unquote, basket. What were the first steps you started taking to kind of take it into your own hands and get the healing that you so needed?
You know, I think the first step was actually knowledge and education, because I just didn't know. I didn't know that food was so powerful. And I think the only reason I thought about food was because I wasn't eating, and I knew the minimum that you need to eat to live, right? So that's what got me into it, and I started to research, and that blew my mind. And really the first step that I took was to force myself to eat, because I was not eating. Like, I would go a whole day with eating 3 strawberries. Like, that's it. Like, that's all I could eat. And every time I had to sit in front of food, I would have a panic attack, because I hated it so much. Like, it was horrible. And I think the knowledge of the power of food helped me overcome the aversions to the point where I could at least force myself to eat.
Yeah.
And once I did that, my next step was to sort of switch my diet to more whole foods based. So, you know, one of the first things I did was switch out my white bread to a wholemeal bread. You know, just a simple switch out the sugar that I was eating to like a natural honey or maple syrup or something, like something just a little bit more wholesome. And so I would say that those were the main things. And probably my sleep. My sleep was also, I used to be just ridiculous. Like, I used to very commonly go to sleep at 3 a.m. and wake up at like 1 p.m. in the afternoon.
Whoa.
And I still go to sleep on the later side, but it's not that, like, it's reasonable.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just sort of decided no more, and I decided to stick to like a strict sleep schedule, and that actually did so much for me. Just just that regular sleep and wake times did a lot. So those were probably my first 3 steps that I took. Yeah.
And during this time, was stress a big sort of factor for you? Obviously you had the sort of physiological stresses of like not eating, but was there work stress, emotional stress playing a role?
Well, this was more like, this was my anxiety was so severe, like my anxiety disorder and panic disorder. So yeah, that's stress. That's a very, very severe form of stress. So it was so bad that I couldn't work. I didn't have a job. We had financial problems because of that. We had just moved into state. I had just finished my uni degree. And so I'd just been married. So there was a lot of stress at the time. But like the biggest one was the anxiety that was caused by first the Implanon with the seizures, and then the antidepressant withdrawals, which was just so yeah, the anxiety itself was the stress that was keeping me, like, that was my problem.
And it's like when we're in this state of stress, our body like cannot find this sort of like healing state. It's kind of like, you know, it was almost like this perfect storm that you entered of all the things to obviously bring you to where you are today. But I really want to start with like talking about the Implanon. So it's obviously the metal rod that gets put sort of just under the skin on the arm. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Or into the muscle. I'm not sure exactly.
No, it's not supposed. It's supposed to sit like in between the muscle and the skin sort of area. Yeah.
So can you talk us through like what is that? Is it like releasing hormones? Like what exactly is it doing to your body?
Yeah. So I think at the moment the Implanon's actually being replaced with something that's now called the Nexplanon, which is the exact same thing, it's just different. So the Implanon is just like a single rod, and the Nexplanon I think has 3 to 5 smaller rods, but they release the exact same hormone into the system. So what it is it's a progestin only hormonal contraception. Progestin is the synthetic form of progesterone, and it is quite different to our own natural progesterone. Now, most hormonal pills will have a combination of both synthetic estrogen and progestin, whereas this is progestin only. There are many other progestin onlys, like the Mirena, like the IUDs and the mini pill, and there's a few other ones, and the shot, like the Depo-Provera shot, that's progestin. So Implanon and the Depo-Provera shot, they're quite high dose progestin, which is, you know, why they last a long time. But I think that's important to note, because higher dose can sometimes lead to more symptoms. And what it does is it just releases that synthetic progesterone into your system, which tricks your brain into thinking there's plenty of progesterone around. So it shuts off the communication between your brain and your ovaries. It severs the LH, so the luteinizing hormone, so it prevents ovulation. You don't ovulate when you're on it. And that's basically how it works. It's very, very effective. It's in there for 3 years. And
wow,
that's why I chose it, because I was very young when I got married, and I just wanted like the safest option. By safe, I mean for pregnancy, because I didn't want to get pregnant young. So, that's basically it. I was told that it's one of the best choices out there for women, that it's much better than the pill, and there was just no talk to me at all about potential side effects. At all. So I thought I was doing the best thing I could possibly do for myself. And it didn't turn out that way.
And I think where, you know, like I've been off contraception for, God, I would say over 5 years now. And I think my body is still re-regulating to, like I would have been on it since I was maybe like 16. So God, you guys do the maths. I don't even know how old that was, like maybe 9 years that I was on it, I think. Anyway, my maths could be very, very wrong there. But at the time I was doing exactly the same thing as you. I thought I was, you know, doing the best thing, avoiding pregnancy. And when I actually think back on it, I'm like, you're actually stopping your body's natural processes. So for me, anything that kind of goes against nature, I'm like, is this like what we should be doing, you know, for our bodies and for our health? And I know on the Mirena, people don't get their period at all. Like, and I know it probably varies from, you know, different cases and everything. But even for me, hearing that, I'm like, that feels just a little bit off. So, you know, like why would they not get their period? Is it because they're not ovulating? Like, is that the sort of science?
On the Mirena is quite a low dose progestin. So on the Implanon, most women don't get a period. So the idea is you might get a little bit of bleeding at the beginning, and then ovulation is completely shut off, and then you don't get a period. But what happened with me and quite a lot of women on the Implanon is that you get breakthrough spotting that was continuous, and that is the number one reason why women stop, like you get the implant removed. With the Mirena, it's a much lower dose progestin, so it's shown to actually allow ovulation up to 70% of the time. But because the progesterone really, really like thins out the uterine lining, like there's nothing there, like it doesn't allow anything to build up, then nothing bleeds. So you can ovulate without bleeding. So technically it's probably a more natural than the implant or the pill, which completely suppresses ovulation, because like on the pill you're getting the period, but it's not a period because you haven't ovulated. It's a breakthrough bleed, which comes from the withdrawal of when you start taking the sugar pills in the pack. So that's the difference. So, but like, I think the problem is that even if you go through Mirena, and it sounds better because it's like, hey, it's preventing pregnancy by, you know, not allowing an implantation to occur because there's no lining there for it to implant into. it's like more natural because it allows ovulation, but progestins themselves have been shown to be quite bad for mental health. So there was a huge, massive study on 1 million women that came out of Denmark, and I love this study. And it showed that progestin-only contraception, whatever form that is, had a 90% increased risk of depression.
Wow.
And other mental health conditions, especially if you took it earlier in life. So if you were quite young as a teenager, but even if you took it earlier in life and then you stop taking it, you still have an increased risk to develop depression or other mental health disorders later on in life. So it's pretty big, and it's probably the number one reason, I think, I'm not really sure, but I think it's the number one reason most women are now sort of looking at alternatives is the mental health component. Yeah.
So I want to talk about the alternatives, because for someone maybe listening to this, and obviously this is just for education, entertainment purposes, but for somebody like listening, being like, oh, I am on the pill, but I want to perhaps move to something more natural, or what sort of options are there? So I know you do the tracking of your cycle and
So what we've really got are we have the copper IUD, which is non-hormonal copper rod, which is an option. It lasts for 10 years. It's quite effective, but it does cause quite heavy and painful periods because it creates localized inflammation. And that's a concern. Apparently that does get better after the first couple of years, but if you're already someone struggling with painful and heavy periods, that's makes it quite unbearable for some women. If it just makes it a lot worse. And there is a risk of, I don't know too much about it, but there is the risk of copper toxicity, and the way that copper interferes with estrogen, it does make you a little bit more estrogen dominant at the same time. It kind of depletes your zinc. I haven't gone into, I don't think there is that much research on the copper component, but I know there are a lot of stories about that. There are a lot of women sharing their stories in that area. I don't know any of the research off the top of my head, but it's just something to consider. The other options are your barrier methods, which are your condoms or your diaphragms. Condoms are definitely more effective than diaphragms, but they're okay if they're used properly. And then you have what I'm trained to do, which is fertility awareness, which is where you track your cycles, you identify your fertile days, and during those days, if you're trying to avoid pregnancy, you either use a barrier or you avoid.
And so do you do as far as like doing your basal body temperature and checking that every day and logging it? Amazing.
So it's a symptothermal method. So you're doing you're checking for physical signs, which is your cervical mucus, and really, like, when you learn to identify the cervical mucus, that's when you open your fertile window, and that's when you know. And then you're tracking it with temperature, and when you get a rise in the temperature that's sustained for 3 days, you can pinpoint retrospectively ovulation so that you know the date of ovulation. And you, of course, absolutely can use it for pregnancy prevention if it's done well. If you're taught to do it properly, it has a very high success rate. You also use it to help you conceive faster if you're trying to get pregnant. I like to do I do it on myself, and the reason I try to help women learn to do it is it's one of the best diagnostic tools we've got for our hormones. So if you learn to read the menstrual cycle and know how to match that up with our hormones, it's probably, like, that's in my training I was taught, it's better than a blood test. And really that's how I figured out my own problems. So I recognized these patterns that I was stuck in with my cycle that came at the same times each cycle. And when I learned to track it, and I learned those patterns and what those patterns meant in relation to my hormones, I was able to go, right, this is my problem. No one's been able to figure it out, but I walked straight into a naturopath and I said, I need this. This is what I've got. And and it worked, because I knew what was wrong with me based on my own cycle.
So I want to touch on like what those symptoms that were coming up and what were like the main sort of signposts in your cycle. But like, I just want to state, like, women are fucking, like, we are so intuitive and our bodies are so intuitive. And like, when we do start to tap into our cycle, like there's so much wisdom in it. Like I'm similar to you in a way of like, I've been tracking my cycle, and I'm ovulating at the moment, and I can pick the exact days. And it's like, I see the change in, you know, the cervical mucus, and it's all there, but we need to give our body a break from like, you know, taking the pill and all that to get back into cycle. And two, it's the education around like actually understanding what our body's trying to tell us all the time in every single moment. So back to like your things that were coming up throughout your cycle, what did they sort of look like, or like those signs?
So for me, I should back up with my story. With the seizures, what they were caused by was a lack of ovulation due to the progesterone, the lack of progesterone, because you don't produce any progesterone if you don't ovulate. That helps you uptake the neurotransmitter GABA, and it also helps you process your cortisol and adrenaline, helps you get that out of your system. So I couldn't. So obviously my cortisol, adrenaline was super high, and my GABA was very, very low. GABA is a calming neurotransmitter. Yeah. Anyway, a year later did start to ovulate again, and I never had a seizure again. But my hormones were very, 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 very low. Both my estrogen and progesterone were very low. And they stayed that way for about 3 years. Now, part of that was because it took me about 3 years to learn to eat properly. I was still very underweight, and I still had so much anxiety around food. I really just wasn't giving my body enough energy to produce the hormones that it needed. But after that 3-year period, I improved because I started to eat better, but I kind of got stuck into this pattern that I was in for a while. And I was okay, like I was eating enough, I'd been nourishing myself. But I was stuck in this pattern of I had low estrogen, low progesterone, but I still had estrogen dominance at the same time. Yeah. So the way that manifested in my cycle was right after the end of my period. So when I stopped bleeding, I would have 2 to 3 days every single month of feeling like, I don't know how to call it, very low, anxious. I would get very bad intrusive thoughts. Yeah. And they would last for about 3 days, and then they would go away. And now I know that as soon as my estrogen would start to kick in, which happens around 3 days after the end of your bleed, that would help the intrusive thoughts calm down, because estrogen helps with that process. And we actually have a study that I remember, I did it at uni, that talks about women with low estrogen are more prone to intrusive, repetitive thoughts, right? Yeah. So that was one of the symptoms. The other symptom that I had that suggested low estrogen was right after ovulation, for about a week and a bit, I would get vaginal dryness. Yeah. And then it would go away. So the first half of my cycle, I didn't have it. When I was all fertile and stuff, I didn't have that. But because what happens is estrogen after ovulation drops for about 7 days. Yeah. And then it starts to pick up again slightly, and then drops again right before the period. So that 7-day period for me, I'd have extreme vaginal. At the beginning, it was extreme. Like it was like atrophy level. Yeah. And it got better and better, but I still never got rid of it. And then the low progesterone phase, I had spotting before my period, and initially it was like 7 days leading up to my period, and then I got it down to about 2 to 3 days. Yeah. But I just sort of got stuck there at 2 to 3 days, and I had a lot of water retention, like you were saying, the very sore boobs. Like I felt like I would put on 2 to 3 kilos in the second part of my cycle every month. I know. Just feeling really puffy and bloated, and I also had chronic headaches. They weren't migraines, so like they weren't that bad. Like I never actually took medication for them, but they were chronic. Like they were just there all the time, and probably especially right before my period. So the fact that I was able to track my cycle and go, I only get dryness here, and I only get, spotting here, and I only get my weird intrusive thoughts here, I was able to figure what that was, like what my hormones were doing. And
so you could see at that certain points that different hormones were either dropping or spiking, which was causing these sort of symptoms.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Would you suggest then, like when you're tracking your cycle, track your symptoms as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's the best thing we could do as women, like body literacy. Like, it's so empowering because you can learn your patterns and you can do what I did and do something about them. Like, just finally go out and get the help that you need, because you could be trying all sorts of things, not knowing what your hormonal imbalance is. And it won't be fixing anything really. But the other thing is, like, you can learn your patterns and just adjust your life to them. And just that adjustment of life to your own patterns eases symptoms in of itself, you know. Like, just knowing, you know what, like for me, if now, like, probably the main PMS symptom that I have left is I get quite fatigued about 3 days before my period comes, and I just go with that now. Like, I will know it's coming and I will plan for it, and then I will allow myself the rest, and it just makes mine and everyone else's life more easy, because if I don't rest during that time, that's when you can get the irritability and I get cranky, you know. And so just knowing that helps you live life in tune with yourself, and it's better for you and for people around you too.
100%. What's that book all about, Living with Your Cycle? Do you know what what's it called?
There's a few.
It's an amazing book, and I remember Period Power, that's it.
Oh yeah,
phenomenal. So by Maisie Hill. So it's once I sort of learnt the principles from that, I same as you, I kind of like could plan out, okay, for example, I'm ovulating today. So I'm like, I've got 3 podcast recordings. I'm like, was at the cafe for brekkie, you know, like catching up with friends, a very social and outward time. But then say, for example, around my period, that's a little bit more, I'm not one of those people who are like, I'm not seeing anyone on my period. I'm more insular. I'm more sort of like in my hermit mode. And then I kind of have this funny thing just before ovulation. I go into like a cleaning frenzy. Like, I'm talking, I like just clean the whole house. I clean out like those drawers that haven't been touched for like ages. And it's this weird sort of like preparing the house for conception, quote unquote, like, you know, which would happen in ovulation. So yeah, I think living with your cycles is probably another really empowering thing we can do as women.
Oh yeah. And I think, like, for me, with what I do with my blog and my recipes, it's so interesting because estrogen makes you more creative. And so I find that I naturally come up with all of my recipe ideas in the first part of my cycle when my estrogen's rising. And then when progesterone makes you a lot more focused and detail orientated, so then that's more like being super productive and getting it all down and focused. And yeah, it's just interesting how when you know that, you can just
work with it. Yeah, totally.
It's so good. I love it.
Me too. So I want to touch on like the food aspect now, because like food obviously was, you know, your biggest healer, as well as the knowledge you were gaining. So what sort of foods did you start to incorporate, or you know, what can we start to take into our bodies to sort of bring that healing about?
Yeah, I think the principle for hormone health and food, and what I did as well, but I just did it very, very slowly. And I would suggest anyone to do it the same. Do it slowly, because you need to allow your body to adjust to changes, is just to get in as much variety of plants as you can.
Yeah.
Even if that means swapping out the colors, you know, that's going to give you some variety, and that gives you health benefits. And that can be hard, because if your gut is compromised, that might not be a very smooth journey. That's why I took it so slow, because my gut was wiped out, so I had to wait for it to adjust to everything. And just having a good variety of legumes, whole grains, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, herbs and spices, and whole foods.
That's so good. Yeah. And so what is it about the seeds? Or should we quickly talk about like what seed cycling is for anyone who's like, what the fuck are you guys talking about? Yeah.
Okay, so for anyone that doesn't know, and actually when I first came across it, I was like, what is this? I thought it was something going to be way more complicated than what it was. It's not.
I thought it was bicycling. Like, I thought it was like actually something like you're on a cycle. I'm like, what is this? Oh.
Yeah. So what it is in the first half of your cycle, so during your period and up to ovulation, you incorporate 2 different types of seeds, which is flax seeds and pumpkin seeds. And in the second half, you incorporate, so from ovulation to the start of your period, you incorporate sesame seeds and sunflower seeds. And you're usually told to grind them up and use like 1 to 2 tablespoons a day of each, or one or the other, or however you want to do it. Yeah. And that's it. Like, that's how you do
fucking easy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So literally within a month of doing it, like I would say 80% of my symptoms went, like, which is wild.
Wow.
So it was just showing, because I don't really eat that much nuts or seeds anyway. So it was just showing like my body was super depleted in whatever minerals and nutrients they're sort of providing.
Yeah.
And it's so easy.
I think like nuts for me when I started were really good, because I don't think people realize how incredibly nutrient dense nuts and seeds are, both of them, nuts and seeds. So I think for me, if I were to pinpoint some things that really helped me, I would say nuts and seeds were it for me at the beginning too.
Yeah.
But I think in your case, based on the research that we have, so it's important for people to know that even though we like seed cycling, you don't have to cycle the seeds if it doesn't work for you. You know, like if you're someone that's like, that's too hard of a routine for me to stick to. You don't have to do that. I do suggest incorporating them, and in particular flax seeds. So we actually have quite a good amount of evidence for flax seeds. And when I was listening to your symptoms that you were talking about, I would say probably the majority of the benefits probably did come from the flax seeds, because flax seeds have a very potent, amazing phytoestrogen in them called lignans, which is part of the fibrous part of the plant, of the flaxseed. And so what that does is when it gets into your gut, it gets converted by the good bacteria in your gut to a compound called enterolactone, and that goes around the body and it helps to literally balance estrogen in the body.
So cool.
So it is so powerful that it is considered by like the gynecological practice, whatever it is, first line treatment for cyclical breast pain.
Whoa.
So and it's also considered that way for heavy menstrual periods and painful menstrual periods. And the reason for that is that it helps to sort of get rid of those harmful estrogens that could have been caused because the liver is burdened, or the gut has issues excreting out that estrogen that should be out of the body. So it's so powerful for estrogen balance. I think and that, like, if you're going to choose the one, that's the one I would choose as a woman.
It's like the power seed.
I mean, I don't know, I'm pretty, like, all of them are good. Like pumpkin seeds are also amazing in different ways, but for, you know, direct hormone support, flax seeds are the key.
I love it. So a little trick that I like discovered because I was like, how am I going to like remember what like the seeds are for the different parts of the cycle? So when you bleed, it's like dark. So it's the dark seeds, and then ovulate, you're coming out, it's sun, it's bright, light seeds. So I always have to have a system to like remember things. So I want to talk about estrogen dominance, because I think it's something that, you know, you're probably seeing a lot with your clients, and it's something we're hearing about more and more. What are the main like causes of estrogen dominance?
Look, when it comes to any hormone imbalance, stress is probably going to be behind everything. So that's one of the main big causes. But when we're looking at estrogen dominance, I think it's important for women to understand that outside of puberty and perimenopause, when our ovaries are, you know, balancing, figuring things out, it's really uncommon for the ovary itself to produce too much estrogen. So it's not a problem of your body is producing too much. It's that once it is produced, it can get stuck in the body. So the way I like to describe it is like all hormones have a pathway throughout the body. So it gets produced in the ovary, and then it travels throughout the body and does all the amazing things that estrogen does, you know, breast, uterus, brain, bone, all the good things that it's supposed to do. And then once it's used up, it's sent to the liver to be filtered out, to be metabolized and removed via the urine and the stool. And so if we have problems sort of at the liver, gallbladder, and gut area, which again, all of these 3 areas can be affected by stress and emotions. Because we know the gut-brain connection, right? We know that. So that's a big underlying factor. And also stress and emotions, like if you have too much adrenaline and cortisol pumping through your body, that will be prioritized for removal over estrogen. So then estrogen can get because adrenaline, cortisol, they are survival hormones. So they're big and they're abundant and they're around all the time, and we're constantly overtaxing ourselves. So there's too much of them, really. So yeah, that's what we've got to look at. So of course, stress management and mental and emotional health have a huge part of it. And then we're also looking at how do you support your gut and how do you support your liver to help you process that estrogen out.
Good. It's like a fine what is it, like a well-oiled machine. Like we need all the cogs turning just to make, to be optimal healthy women,
that's right.
Now I was going to talk about the there was something that you mentioned. Oh, what should we stop doing like in our sort of like day-to-day lives? So we're talking about like all the things that are good for us, so sleep and stressing less and eating whole foods and flax seeds. Is there anything that we should stop doing to improve our hormone health?
In terms of food?
In terms of everything, I think.
Okay. The one, I just feel like I get a bit of hate for saying this, but the one thing that I really think is important for women is stopping, or at the very least limiting, alcohol.
Yeah.
Because it's just like I just explained the estrogen dominance thing. Alcohol is a toxin, it's a poison to the body, and so if it's going to go through your liver, it's going to get prioritized above everything else. And so a few drinks of alcohol will instantly lead to inflammation, it will instantly lead to increased cortisol, and it will instantly lead to increased estrogen, because that's not a priority for the body when it's just trying to get the alcohol out. And I think for a long time it was thought that some light to moderate drinking might be beneficial for health, but I feel like the evidence at the moment is sort of steering away from that. Like, of course you can find studies that say anything is good, but like the majority of the studies that are coming out at the moment is sort of, for brain health in particular, it's like zero alcohol is beneficial. I think
there's like a big movement at the moment to people who are sober curious, and they're actually wanting to just see what life is like without the alcohol. So I know I've done sort of periods where it's like I'll do 3 months off having no alcohol, and that I've saw massive changes in my health and just like my brain capacity, all of the different things. And as you said, when we're not sort of putting a poison into our body, like we can let our body do its natural thing. Not saying I don't have a drink every now and then, I definitely do, but definitely being like conscious about what we're consuming and how much and all that stuff is super important.
And just being aware of it. So if you are going to have a drink, support your body afterwards so you can recover faster, because it's really not I know people that just have spent so much money going to all the people, doing all the diets, doing all the supplements, and they just have a drinking habit, and really nothing got better at all until they stopped the drinking. Because it's just such a it's a lot for the body.
Well, if you're doing like the healthy diet, like the supplements, all that stuff, it's just like that's kind of just like washing it out the window in a way. So Talida, I love to finish on a question, and it's like, what's the one thing that's changed your life, apart from flax seeds, obviously?
I have a few things that have changed my life. I think probably one of the ones that have been most profound for me and my particular journey in health struggles is the herb ashwagandha.
Oh, okay. Talk us through what's going on there.
Okay, so ashwagandha it's a root. I don't know too much about the actual plant itself, but it's known very well for helping to reduce cortisol levels. And it's actually got a little bit of science on it showing that it's just as good as some of our anti-anxiety medications, but without the side effects. It's an adaptogen, so it helps your body become resilient to stress, and it nourishes the adrenal glands, and it has been, because it's an adaptogen, it's safe to take long term, and it actually works better if you take it long term. And it's actually been a complete game changer for me, because I think with anxiety that I had so severely, like, you do all the things and you get better, but you still end up sort of being stuck in this cycle. And because it all feeds into each other. And ashwagandha just helped lower my adrenaline and my cortisol enough to just sort of snap me out of it.
That's
and
cool.
It just fixed, it was just that little bit that you need to just get you past that last hump. And it's just, life is so good. On this herb, I love it.
So what, how do you take it? Do you put it in smoothies? Do you just take a spoonful in water?
I take capsules, because I like to know that I'm getting a dose that's going to be effective for me. So you can take it as an extract, and you need around 500 to 700 milligrams as an extract in a capsule if you want, or you can take a whole root powder, which is what I do in capsules. And if you're going to do that, that's sort of less concentrated, so I take 3 grams of that. But that's totally dependent on the person. I say the 500 to 700 milligrams because that's what I've seen in the research studies for ashwagandha. But you might need more, you might need less, and it might not be for you. Like, it depends on the person, but it is generally quite a very safe herb to take.
Awesome. That's so good. Well, I know you launched a book recently, so where can people get the book? Where can people connect with you or book a session?
So my book is called Eating for Hormone Balance, a Plant-Based Guide, and I talk about a lot of these concepts about how to eat for hormones from a plant-based perspective, because I feel like there's not that much out there to help plant-based women. And it's got 60 recipes, all cycle synced to the different phases of the menstrual cycle. At the moment, I've only got it up on Amazon, but it is available internationally. And you can find it probably through my Instagram, where I share a lot about it, and it's linked in my bio, which is at Hazel_and_Cacao.
Amazing. Oh, well, thank you so much for today. Like, this is just, I love talking about this stuff, and I just know simple things like seed cycling, flax seeds, ashwagandha, they can help so much. So I'm really, really appreciative of your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was lots of fun.
It was so good. Well, guys, we will see you next week, and thank you so much for tuning in.